What if I told you that spilling coffee on your boss could make you a millionaire by sunset? Have you ever had one of those moments where you think your entire career is over because of a single mistake? That split second where your heart drops into your stomach, and you're already mentally packing your desk and rehearsing the phone call home to explain how you just destroyed everything you worked for? Madison Harper was about to discover that sometimes our biggest disasters become our greatest victories. But how does an intern go from unemployment panic to marriage proposal in just 12 hours? This isn't some fairy tale. This is what happens when authentic character meets unexpected opportunity, when vulnerability crashes headfirst into power, and when one woman's worst nightmare becomes the foundation for a love story that would shake Chicago's financial district to its core. Before we jump into this incredible journey, if you've ever felt like the underdog in a corporate world, smash that like button because Madison's story will completely change how you think about failure. And make sure to subscribe because we're exploring real-life inspired billionaire stories that prove your next breakthrough might be hiding inside your next breakdown. Let me set the stage for you. Sterling & Company wasn't just another investment firm. It was a glass tower of ambition rising 43 floors above Chicago's financial district. Every morning, hundreds of sharp-suited professionals filed through its marble lobby, each one carrying dreams of wealth, power, and recognition. The air itself seemed to hum with the electricity of deals being made and fortunes being won or lost with a single phone call. But if Sterling & Company was a kingdom, then Julian Crane was its undisputed emperor. At 44 years old, Julian had transformed what was once a struggling regional firm into a multi-billion-dollar empire. His reputation preceded him everywhere. The man who never smiled in meetings, whose sharp stare could reduce seasoned directors to stammering teenagers, whose approval was so rare that employees treasured even his smallest nods of acknowledgement like precious gems. They called him the Ice King behind his back. Not because he was cruel, though he could be ruthless when necessary, but because he seemed utterly untouchable by human emotion. Julian Crane existed in a stratosphere where feelings, liabilities, and vulnerability was a luxury he couldn't afford. His corner office occupied the entire 43rd floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of the city he'd conquered. The space was pristine, minimalist, cold, much like the man who inhabited it. Every surface gleamed, every document had its designated place, and not a single personal item betrayed any hint of the human being beneath the corporate facade. Julian's daily routine was legendary in its precision. He arrived at exactly 6:47 a.m., reviewed international markets while his assistant prepared his first cup of black coffee, and by 7:30 a.m., he was already 3 steps ahead of whatever crisis or opportunity the day might bring. He spoke in crisp, measured sentences that cut straight to the heart of any issue. Waste his time, and you might find yourself updating your resume by lunch. Now, 23 floors below this ivory tower, Madison Harper was having a very different kind of morning. At 24, Madison represented everything Julian Crane was not. Where he was calculated, she was spontaneous. Where he was guarded, she wore her emotions openly. Where he commanded respect through fear, she earned affection through genuine warmth and an infectious work ethic that had already made her popular among the other interns. Madison had grown up in a small Ohio town where everyone knew everyone, where success was measured in simpler terms, and where the biggest corporate drama involved the annual disagreement over the church bake sale budget. Chicago felt like an alien planet, exciting but terrifying, full of opportunities she'd dreamed about but never quite believed she deserved. She'd landed the Sterling & Company internship through a combination of stellar grades, relentless persistence, and what her professors called raw potential. But potential doesn't pay rent, and potential doesn't quiet the voice in your head that whispers you don't belong in a world of $1,000 suits and casual conversations about 7-figure investments. That particular Monday morning, Madison stood in the marble lobby clutching a manila folder that represented weeks of sleepless nights and obsessive research. Inside those pages was her analysis of a tech startup merger, a report that could either prove she belonged in this world or confirm her worst fears about being out of her league. Her hands trembled slightly as she waited for the elevator. This wasn't just another assignment. This was her chance to prove that the small-town girl with big dreams could hold her own among Chicago's financial elite. Her supervisor had specifically requested that she deliver this report directly to Julian Crane himself, an honor that both thrilled and terrified her. The elevator climbed toward the 43rd floor, and with each passing number, Madison felt her heartbeat quicken. She'd spent the entire weekend perfecting every detail, checking and double-checking her calculations, rehearsing her presentation until she could recite it in her sleep. She had no way of knowing that in less than 5 minutes, her carefully ordered world was about to collide with Julian Crane's in the most unexpected way possible. Sometimes destiny announces itself with trumpets and fanfare. Sometimes it arrives disguised as disaster, wearing the face of failure, carrying nothing but a cup of coffee and the power to change everything. Madison Harper was about to learn that the distance between catastrophe and miracle is often measured in heartbeats. To truly understand what was about to unfold on that Monday morning, you need to know just how different these two worlds really were. Madison Harper's journey to Sterling and Company began in Millbrook, Ohio, population 8,400, where the tallest building was the grain elevator, and the most exciting business news involved whether the local diner would finally accept credit cards. Her father managed the town's only hardware store. Her mother taught 3rd grade at the elementary school she'd once attended, and Sunday dinners at her grandmother's house were mandatory family affairs where everyone actually enjoyed each other's company. Growing up, Madison's biggest rebellion was choosing finance over education as her college major. Her parents supported her dreams, but worried about their daughter venturing into a world they couldn't quite comprehend. When she announced her acceptance to Sterling and Company's competitive internship program, her mother had asked, "Honey, what exactly does an investment firm do?" Her father's contribution was more practical. "Just remember who you are, sweetheart. Don't let them change that." Now, 3 months into her internship, Madison was discovering that remembering who you are becomes exponentially harder when you're surrounded by people who seem to have been born wearing designer suits and speaking in acronyms you're still learning to decode. Her fellow interns came from Ivy League schools with names that carried weight in conversations. They casually mentioned family connections to Wall Street legends, summer homes in the Hamptons, and internships at other prestigious firms that they'd turned down to be here. Madison, meanwhile, had worked 3 part-time jobs to afford her interview suit and still checked her bank account balance every morning with the same anxiety other people reserved for medical test results. But here's what her privileged colleagues didn't possess. Madison had something money couldn't buy and connections couldn't guarantee. She had hunger. Real hunger. The kind that wakes you up at 5 a.m. to review market reports before your shift at the campus coffee shop. The kind that makes you stay late to double-check calculations that everyone else considers good enough. The kind that transforms nervousness into determination because failure isn't just disappointing. It's not an option. This particular weekend, Madison had lived on coffee and granola bars while perfecting her analysis of TechFlow Solutions, the startup that Sterling and Company was considering acquiring. While her fellow interns attended networking parties and charity galas, Madison had constructed financial models, analyzed market projections, and identified growth opportunities that others had overlooked. She discovered something remarkable buried in TechFlow's data, a patent application that could revolutionize mobile payment processing. It was the kind of insight that separated good analysts from great ones, the kind of discovery that could make or break careers. Meanwhile, 43 floors above the intern bullpen, Julian Crane inhabited a completely different universe. His transformation from struggling entrepreneur to billionaire CEO hadn't happened by accident. 15 years earlier, Julian had inherited Sterling and Company when it was hemorrhaging money, losing clients, and facing bankruptcy within 6 months. Everyone advised him to sell the company's assets and walk away. Instead, he'd mortgaged everything he owned, fired half the staff, and rebuilt the firm from the ground up. The process had cost him more than money. His marriage had crumbled under the pressure of 18-hour workdays and the constant stress of potential failure. His ex-wife, Rebecca, had wanted the man she'd fallen in love with, the dreamer who talked about changing the world. What she got instead was a machine focused solely on survival and success. The divorce was finalized on the same day Sterling and Company landed its first major client. Julian celebrated alone in his empty apartment, eating Chinese takeout while reviewing quarterly projections. He'd chosen his path, and personal happiness was apparently the price of admission. Since then, Julian's personal life had become as carefully managed as his business portfolio. He dated occasionally, usually accomplished women who understood that his company would always come first. These relationships followed predictable patterns. Initial attraction, brief companionship, inevitable disappointment when they realized he genuinely had no intention of prioritizing anything above Sterling and Company's growth. His reputation for being cold wasn't entirely accurate. Julian simply couldn't afford warmth. Every decision carried the weight of thousands of jobs and billions in client investments. One moment of weakness, one emotional mistake, could destroy everything he'd built. So he'd constructed walls around his heart that were higher and stronger than the glass tower he commanded. His Monday morning routine was sacred. By 6:47 a.m., he was at his desk, reading international market reports while his assistant prepared his first cup of black coffee. No sugar, no cream, no exceptions. By 7:15, he'd identified the day's priorities and potential problems. By 7:30, he was 3 steps ahead of whatever challenges might emerge. Julian's office was a masterpiece of controlled environment. Temperature maintained at exactly 68 degrees. Natural light filtered through UV protective glass. Every surface reflected his need for order and control. 2 phones, one for internal communications, one for external. A computer system that updated market fluctuations in real time. And not a single photograph, personal memento, or hint of the man behind the corporate armor. His executive assistant, Margaret, had worked for him for 8 years and could count on 2 hands the number of times she'd seen him genuinely smile. She managed his calendar with military precision, screened his calls with protective vigilance, and maintained the barrier between Julian Crane, the CEO, and Julian Crane, the human being. Though sometimes she wondered if that distinction still existed. The rest of Sterling and Company's employees related to Julian through a complex hierarchy of fear and respect. Directors sought his approval like medieval knights seeking royal favor. Department heads measured their success by how rarely they required his direct intervention. Even senior partners approached his office with the same careful preparation they'd use for hostile takeovers. Stories about Julian's exacting standards had become company legends. There was the director who'd been dismissed for being 2 minutes late to a presentation. The analyst who'd been promoted after catching an error everyone else had missed. The merger that had been canceled because Julian sensed something off about the opposing firm's CEO during their handshake. But here's what nobody at Sterling and Company understood about their formidable leader. Julian Crane was profoundly lonely. Success had given him everything he'd thought he wanted: wealth, power, respect, influence. What it hadn't provided was connection. Real, genuine human connection with someone who saw beyond the corporate facade to whatever remained of the dreamer Rebecca had once loved. He'd convinced himself that loneliness was simply the cost of greatness. That personal fulfillment was a luxury he'd traded for professional achievement. That the walls he'd built around his heart were necessary protection rather than self-imposed prison walls. On this particular Monday morning, as Madison Harper stepped into that elevator clutching her career-defining report, Julian Crane was reviewing acquisition targets while unconsciously hoping his assistant would remember to order lunch. He had no idea that in less than 10 minutes, a 24-year-old intern from Ohio was about to crash through every wall he'd spent 15 years constructing. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor about timing. Sometimes it waits until you're completely convinced that your life is following a predictable script before it sends someone to rewrite the entire story. That someone was currently riding an elevator toward the 43rd floor, nervously reviewing her notes one final time, completely unaware that she was about to become the catalyst for the most unexpected transformation in Sterling and Company's corporate history. The elevator doors opened on the 43rd floor with a soft mechanical whisper that might as well have been a starting gun. Madison stepped onto Julian Crane's executive floor for the first time in her life, and the immediate difference from the bustling lower levels was startling. Here, silence reigned supreme. The hallway stretched before her like a museum corridor. Pristine white walls adorned with abstract art that probably cost more than her college tuition. Thick carpeting that muffled every footstep, and an atmosphere so rarefied it felt like stepping into a different dimension. Margaret, Julian's assistant, glanced up from her perfectly organized desk with the expression of someone who'd been guarding sacred territory for 8 years. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her reading glasses perched precisely on her nose, and her smile was polite but measured, the kind reserved for people who needed to prove they belonged here. "Miss Harper, I presume?" Margaret's voice carried the authority of someone who'd been Julian's gatekeeper long enough to read people's worth in their posture. "Mr. Crane is expecting your report on the TechFlow acquisition." Madison nodded, suddenly hyper-aware of everything. The weight of the folder in her hands, the sound of her breathing, the way her heart hammered against her ribs like it was trying to escape. She'd rehearsed this moment dozens of times, but standing here now, the reality felt overwhelming. "He's in his office," Margaret continued, pressing a button on her desk phone. "Mr. Crane? Miss Harper is here with the tech flow analysis." Julian's voice crackled through the intercom, crisp and efficient. "Send her in." 2 words. That's all it took to make Madison's mouth go completely dry. She approached his office door, a massive oak barrier that seemed designed to intimidate rather than welcome, and knocked twice. The sound echoed in the quiet hallway like gunshots. "Enter." Madison pushed open the door and stepped into Julian Crane's domain, immediately overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the space. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Chicago spread out below like a conquered kingdom. The office was exactly what she'd expected. Minimalist, powerful, intimidating, but somehow larger and more imposing than her imagination had prepared her for. Julian sat behind his desk, reviewing documents with the focused intensity of a surgeon performing delicate operations. He didn't look up immediately, and Madison stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, clutching her folder and trying to remember how to breathe normally. When he finally raised his eyes to meet hers, Madison felt the full weight of his attention like a physical force. Those steel-gray eyes seemed to catalog every detail about her in an instant. Her nervous posture, her carefully chosen professional outfit, the slight tremor in her hands as she held the report. "Miss Harper," he said, his voice carrying no warmth but no hostility either. Simply the neutral tone of a man accustomed to measuring people's value in their first 30 seconds. "I trust you have something worthwhile for me." "Yes, sir," Madison managed, surprised that her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I've completed a comprehensive analysis of the TechFlow acquisition, and I believe I've identified some opportunities that—" She never got to finish that sentence. The coffee cup was sitting innocuously on the corner of Julian's desk, black ceramic, filled with his usual morning fuel, positioned exactly where it had been every morning for 8 years. Margaret had placed it there at 6:52 a.m., 5 minutes after his arrival, just as she'd done thousands of times before. But this morning, as Madison stepped forward to place her report on the desk, her foot caught the edge of the Persian rug that had been perfectly flat since its installation 3 years ago. The stumble was tiny, barely noticeable under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances. Madison's hand shot out instinctively to steady herself, and in that split second of loss of balance, her elbow connected with the coffee cup. Time didn't slow down. That only happens in movies. Instead, everything happened with brutal, unstoppable speed. The cup tipped, then fell, then shattered against the polished hardwood floor with a crash that seemed to reverberate through the entire building. Hot black coffee exploded across Julian's pristine white shirt, soaked into the papers scattered across his desk, and created a dark pool that spread across the floor like spilled ink on fresh paper. The silence that followed was so complete that Madison could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Julian shot to his feet, coffee dripping from his shirt sleeves, his expression shifting through several stages of shock, disbelief, and what Madison was certain would culminate in fury that would end her career before it had truly begun. She stood frozen, watching dark stains bloom across his shirt like some kind of corporate warfare wound, her mind completely blank except for a single thought repeating on endless loop. "I'm finished. I'm completely finished. I." The word came out as barely a whisper. Madison cleared her throat and tried again, louder this time. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry." Julian said nothing. He looked down at his ruined shirt, then at the coffee-soaked papers on his desk, then at the spreading pool on his previously immaculate floor. His jaw was tight, his shoulders rigid, and Madison braced herself for the explosion she knew was coming. Instead, Julian did something completely unexpected. He laughed. Not a big laugh, just a short, sharp sound that might have been surprise or disbelief or something Madison couldn't identify. But it was unmistakably laughter, and it was so incongruous with everything she'd expected that she wondered if she was having some kind of stress-induced hallucination. "Well," Julian said finally, his voice carrying an edge she couldn't quite read, "this is certainly a first." Madison's cheeks burned with embarrassment so intense she felt dizzy. "I'll clean this up right now. I'll pay for your shirt." "You'll stop talking," Julian interrupted, but his tone wasn't harsh. If anything, he sounded almost amused. "And yes, you'll clean this up. Now, comment below. What would you have done in Madison's shoes? Would you have run or faced the music?" Share this video with someone who needs to hear that mistakes can lead to miracles. Madison rushed to gather napkins from the small conference table, her hands shaking as she dropped to her knees to mop up the coffee. This was it, the end of everything she'd worked for, reduced to cleaning floors in front of the most powerful man she'd ever met. What she didn't know was that Julian Crane was having thoughts he hadn't experienced in 15 years. As he watched this young woman immediately take responsibility for her mistake without making excuses or trying to shift blame, something stirred in him that he'd forgotten existed. Something that would change both of their lives forever. As Madison knelt on the floor, frantically dabbing at the coffee stain with napkins that seemed pathetically inadequate for the disaster she'd created, Julian Crane experienced something he hadn't felt in 15 years. Surprise. Not the corporate kind of surprise, like unexpected market fluctuations or last-minute deal changes, but genuine human surprise. The kind that makes you reconsider everything you thought you knew about a situation. He watched this young woman attack the mess with determined efficiency, her professional composure completely shattered, but her character shining through in ways she probably didn't realize. No excuses. Julian looked at Madison, who was still holding the coffee-stained tile and looked like she might faint. "Close your mouth, Miss Harper. We have work to do." By 6 p.m. that evening, word of Madison's promotion had traveled through Sterling and Company like wildfire through dry timber. The intern bullpen buzzed with theories. Some claimed she must have family connections nobody knew about. Others whispered about insider information or secret recommendations. A few suggested more scandalous explanations that Madison tried hard not to overhear. But sitting in her new office, a space that 12 hours ago she couldn't have accessed without an appointment, Madison felt like she was living someone else's life. The promotion letter lay on her desk, official and real, but her mind kept returning to that moment when Julian had looked at her with something that resembled understanding. Her new responsibilities were overwhelming. Managing Julian's schedule meant coordinating with people whose names she'd only seen in business magazines. Reviewing acquisition reports required understanding financial complexities that made her college coursework seem elementary. Every email in her inbox carried weight that could impact millions of dollars in investments. Yet somehow, she felt energized rather than intimidated. For the first time since arriving in Chicago, Madison felt like she belonged somewhere. At 6:47 p.m., her desk phone rang. "Miss Harper." Julian's voice was crisp, professional. "Please join me in the Skyline Room. We need to discuss your transition into this role." The Skyline Room occupied the 44th floor, one level above Julian's office and accessible only by private elevator. Madison had heard rumors about this space but never seen it. The company's executive dining room was legendary among employees, reserved for the most important clients and board meetings. When the elevator doors opened, Madison stepped into what felt like a different world entirely. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire space, offering a 360-degree view of Chicago as evening settled over the city. The lighting was soft and warm, a stark contrast to the harsh fluorescence of the office floors below. Round tables were scattered throughout the room, each set with fine china and crystal glasses that caught the light from the city beyond. Julian sat at a table by the western windows, still wearing the fresh shirt Margaret had found for him, but with his tie loosened and his jacket draped over the back of his chair. He looked less like the intimidating CEO who dominated her morning and more like a man having dinner. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I ordered for both of us. I hope you don't mind." Madison sat carefully, hyper-aware of everything. The weight of the silverware, the softness of the chair, the way the city lights were beginning to twinkle as daylight faded. "This is incredible. I rarely eat up here anymore," Julian admitted, following her gaze toward the windows. Too easy to lose track of time watching the city change. A server appeared with their meal, something elegant that Madison couldn't identify but smelled amazing. She realized she hadn't eaten anything since her 5 a.m. coffee and granola bar. "You must have questions," Julian said, cutting into his meal with practiced efficiency. "About the promotion, about expectations, about why I made such an unusual decision." Madison had about 1,000 questions, but one kept pushing to the front of her mind. "Why me? Really? I know what you said about character and problem solving, but there are interns here with better grades, better connections, more experience." Julian paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. The question seemed to surprise him, though Madison couldn't tell if it was because she'd asked or because he didn't have a simple answer. "When was the last time someone told you the truth?" he asked instead of answering directly. What do you mean?" "The truth. About anything important. When was the last time someone said something to you because it was honest rather than because it was what you wanted to hear?" Madison thought about it. "My grandmother, probably. She has no filter whatsoever. Tells everyone exactly what she thinks." Julian smiled, actually smiled, for the first time since she'd met him. "What does she think about your career in finance?" "She thinks I'm crazy for wanting to work with numbers all day when I could be helping people more directly. She also thinks Chicago is too big and too cold, and she's worried I'll forget where I come from. Smart woman." "She is." Madison took a bite of her dinner, surprised by how comfortable this conversation felt. "What about you? Who tells you the truth?" The question seemed to catch Julian off guard. He set down his fork and looked out at the city lights, considering. "Nobody," he said finally. "Not for a very long time." The honesty in his voice surprised Madison. This wasn't the corporate Julian who spoke in measured sentences and strategic pauses. This was someone else entirely, someone who sounded almost lonely. "That must be." Madison searched for the right word. "Isolating." "It's efficient," Julian replied, but something in his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced of that anymore. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the city sprawling out below them like a glittering carpet. Madison found herself studying Julian's profile as he looked out the windows. Without the intimidating context of his office, without the power dynamic of their morning encounter, he looked younger somehow. More human. "I was married once," Julian said suddenly, still gazing out at the city. "She left because she said I'd become someone she didn't recognize. Someone who chose success over everything else that mattered." Madison wasn't sure how to respond to such an unexpected revelation. "She was right," Julian continued. "I did choose success. I convinced myself it was temporary, that once the company was stable, once we were profitable, once we'd secured our position in the market, I'd have time for everything else. But there's always another goal, another acquisition, another challenge." He turned back to face Madison, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't noticed before. Not coldness, but sadness carefully controlled. "You asked why I promoted you," Julian said. "It's because you reminded me of something I'd forgotten." "What's that?" "That there are still people who do things because they're right rather than because they're advantageous. People who take responsibility instead of shifting blame. People who see problems and fix them instead of calling meetings to discuss fixing them." Madison felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I just cleaned up spilled coffee." "No," Julian said firmly. "You revealed who you are when everything goes wrong. That's the most valuable information anyone can give me about themselves." The conversation was venturing into territory that felt both thrilling and dangerous. Madison sensed that Julian Crane was sharing things he rarely discussed with anyone, and she wasn't entirely sure why. "This job," Julian continued, "working directly with me, it's going to be demanding. Long hours, high pressure, decisions that impact thousands of people. Most assistants last about 18 months before they burn out or find something less intense." "Are you trying to scare me?" Madison asked. "I'm trying to be honest with you. The same way you were honest with me this morning when you could have made excuses." Madison met his gaze directly. "I'm not most people." "No," Julian agreed, something shifting in his expression. "You're definitely not." As the city lights grew brighter below them, Madison realized that this dinner was about more than discussing her new role. Something was happening between them. Something that had nothing to do with corporate hierarchy and everything to do with two people recognizing something unexpected in each other. Neither of them had any idea how much more unexpected the evening was about to become. As their dinner plates were cleared away and fresh coffee arrived, Madison noted the irony with a small smile. Julian seemed to be wrestling with something internal. He kept glancing at her, then out at the city lights, then back at her again, as if trying to solve a complex equation in his head. Madison sipped her coffee carefully, hyper-aware that 12 hours ago, coffee had nearly ended her career, and now here she was sharing an elegant dinner with the man she'd accidentally baptized that morning. "Madison," Julian said suddenly, using her first name for the first time all day. The sound of it in his voice made something flutter in her chest. "Can I ask you something personal?" "I think we crossed into personal territory about 20 minutes ago," she replied, surprised by her own boldness. Julian's mouth quirked up in what might have been amusement. "Fair point. What I want to know is, What are you afraid of? The question caught her completely off guard. I'm sorry. Everyone's afraid of something. Failure, success, being alone, being trapped, not being good enough, being too good and threatening others. What keeps you awake at night? Madison studied his face, trying to understand why this mattered to him. The intensity in his gray eyes suggested this wasn't casual dinner conversation. Wasting my potential, she said finally. I'm afraid of playing it safe for so long that I never find out what I could have accomplished if I'd been brave enough to take real risks. Julian nodded slowly, as if her answer confirmed something he'd suspected. I used to be afraid of failure, he said. Then I became afraid of success, because I realized it could cost me everything that actually mattered. Now I think I'm afraid of time. Time. Running out of it. Wasting it. Spending it on the wrong things while the right things slip away. The conversation had taken on in weight that made Madison's pulse quicken. There was something building here, something that felt much larger than a professional dinner between a CEO and his new assistant. Julian reached across the table and took her hand. The contact was electric, not in the dramatic romance novel sense, but in the very real sense of two people connecting in a way that neither had expected or prepared for. His hand was warm, strong, and surprisingly gentle. Madison, he said, his voice lower now, more intimate. I want to tell you something that's going to sound completely insane. Okay, she whispered, not trusting her voice to be steady. This morning, when you spilled that coffee, you didn't just ruin my shirt. You broke through 15 years of carefully constructed walls. You reminded me that there's a difference between existing and living. Madison's heart was racing now. She could see the city lights reflected in his eyes, could feel the warmth of his hand around hers, could sense that whatever he was about to say would change everything. I've spent the last 15 years telling myself that success was enough. That building this company, accumulating wealth and power, creating a legacy, that all of that was sufficient for a life well lived. He paused, his thumb tracing across her knuckles in a gesture so tender it took her breath away. But watching you today, seeing how you handle pressure, how you take responsibility, how you think about problems, I realized I've been lying to myself. Success isn't enough. Connection is what matters. Finding someone who sees you clearly and chooses to stay anyway. Madison felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing that whatever came next would either lift her up or send her falling. Julian, she started, but he gently squeezed her hand. I know this is crazy. I know we've known each other for less than 12 hours. I know that by every rational measure, what I'm about to ask is completely insane. He stood up, still holding her hand, and moved around to her side of the table. The city sprawled out behind him like a glittering backdrop, 44 floors of Chicago providing witness to whatever was about to happen. Then Julian Crane, Billionaire CEO, the man known throughout the financial world as cold and calculating, dropped to one knee beside her chair. Madison Harper, he said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was doing. Will you marry me? The words hung in the air between them like a challenge to everything rational, everything predictable, everything safe. Madison stared at him, her mind completely blank. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. People didn't get proposed to by billionaire CEOs after spilling coffee on them. This was the stuff of romantic comedies and fairy tales, not real life in Chicago's financial district. You don't have a ring, she said, which was possibly the most ridiculous response to a marriage proposal in human history. Julian smiled, really smiled, broad and genuine and transformative. I don't have a lot of things. I don't have a conventional courtship or months of dating or the gradual process most people go through. What I have is absolute certainty that you're the person I want to build a life with. What do you think? Was Madison crazy to say yes, or was this destiny? Let me know in the comments. And if you believe in taking bold chances for love, give this video a thumbs up. But why? Madison asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why me? Why now? Why like this? Because, Julian said, still on one knee, still holding her hand, still looking at her like she was the most important thing in his carefully ordered world. I'm 44 years old and I've never met anyone who made me want to stop measuring everything in terms of profit and loss. Because you walked into my office this morning and accidentally showed me what I've been missing. Because I've spent 15 years building walls and you knocked them all down with a cup of coffee and a genuine apology. He paused, his gray eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her feel like the only person in the world. Because I don't want to spend another day pretending that success without someone to share it with is actually success at all. Madison felt tears she hadn't realized were forming start to slip down her cheeks. This was insane. This was impulsive. This was everything her practical, careful, planned-out approach to life had taught her to avoid. "Madison," Julian said softly, "I'm not asking you to marry the CEO or the billionaire or the reputation. I'm asking you to marry me. The man who's been alone for so long he'd forgotten what connection felt like until you reminded him." She looked at him kneeling beside her chair, this powerful man making himself vulnerable in a way that must be terrifying for someone who'd spent years maintaining absolute control. She thought about her grandmother's advice about recognizing when life offers you something extraordinary. She thought about her own words about being afraid of playing it safe. And then, with the lights of Chicago sparkling behind them and her heart pounding against her ribs, Madison Harper made the most impulsive decision of her entire careful, planned-out life. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." The news of Julian and Madison's engagement spread through Sterling and Company faster than a system-wide server crash. By Tuesday morning, every employee from the mailroom to the executive suite was buzzing with speculation. The official announcement had been brief and professional. A simple memo stating that CEO Julian Crane had become engaged to his new assistant, Madison Harper, and that the couple would be married within the week in a private ceremony. The unofficial reactions ranged from shock to skepticism to outright disbelief. "It's a publicity stunt," whispered Jennifer from accounting to her cubicle neighbor. "Rich men don't marry interns they met yesterday." "Maybe she's pregnant," suggested Mark from IT, which earned him a sharp look from several female colleagues. "I heard she has family money," offered someone from marketing. "You know how these wealthy families arrange things." But the people closest to Julian knew better. Margaret, who had witnessed their coffee-soaked introduction and fielded the subsequent flurry of wedding planning calls, watched her boss with fascination. In 8 years of working for Julian Crane, she had never seen him smile at his phone. She had never heard him hum unconsciously while reviewing quarterly reports. She had certainly never seen him leave the office at 6 p.m. to have dinner with anyone who wasn't a client or board member. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. Julian still demanded excellence, still ran meetings with military precision, still made decisions that affected millions of dollars with calm efficiency. But something had shifted in his energy. The rigid control that had characterized his every movement seemed to have relaxed just enough to let something warmer show through. "He's different," Margaret confided to her husband that evening. "Not soft, exactly, but present. Like he's actually enjoying his life instead of just managing it." Meanwhile, Madison was navigating her own transformation with varying degrees of success. Learning to be Julian's assistant required mastering a complex web of relationships, priorities, and protocols that made her college courses seem quaint by comparison. She coordinated with department heads who controlled budgets larger than her hometown's annual revenue. She scheduled meetings that could determine the fate of entire companies. She reviewed documents that contained more financial data than she'd previously known existed. But the most challenging part wasn't the work itself. It was the way everyone treated her now. The other interns looked at her with expressions ranging from awe to resentment. Some seemed convinced she'd somehow manipulated her way into an impossible situation. Others treated her like a celebrity who'd accidentally wandered into their workplace. A few, to their credit, simply offered congratulations and went back to their own tasks. The senior staff presented an even more complex challenge. Department heads who'd barely acknowledged her existence, as an intern now sought her opinion on matters she was still learning to understand. Directors who'd never spoken to her suddenly remembered urgent items they needed to discuss with Mr. Crane's fiancée. Madison quickly realized that her new position came with influence she'd never asked for and wasn't entirely sure how to handle. "People are afraid to disagree with you now," Julian observed during one of their evening dinners together. They'd fallen into a routine of eating late in his office, reviewing the day's developments while sharing Chinese takeout or whatever Margaret had ordered from the executive dining service. "I noticed that," Madison said, twirling lo mein around her chopsticks with more concentration than the task required. "Roberts from legal actually apologized for presenting 2 different options on the Henderson contract. He acted like offering choices was somehow disrespectful." "Power makes people strange," Julian said. "Even reflected power. They're not sure how much influence you have with me, so they're overcompensating." "Do I have influence with you?" Madison asked, genuinely curious. Julian paused, considering the question seriously. "More than anyone has had in 15 years. The honesty of his answer surprised them both. As the week progressed, Madison began to find her footing in ways that surprised even her. During a contentious meeting about the TechFlow acquisition, she quietly suggested a compromise that satisfied both parties and saved the deal. When a scheduling conflict threatened to derail negotiations with a major client, she proposed a solution that actually strengthened the company's position. Julian watched these developments with growing respect and something deeper: pride in her natural instincts and quick learning curve. "She's not just surviving the transition," he told Margaret one afternoon. "She's actually making things better." "Are you surprised?" Margaret asked with the kind of directness that came from 8 years of managing Julian's expectations. Julian looked thoughtful. "I'm surprised by how naturally she fits. I expected there to be more friction, more adjustment period, more resistance from the staff." "Maybe," Margaret suggested, "people can tell when something is genuine versus when something is calculated. Miss Harper doesn't act like someone who's trying to play politics or gain advantage. She acts like someone who's trying to do good work." The observation struck Julian as particularly insightful. Madison's approach to her new responsibilities was remarkably similar to her response to spilling coffee. No drama, no manipulation, just focused effort to make the best of the situation and contribute something valuable. By Friday afternoon, Sterling and Company had settled into its new reality. Julian Crane was getting married to the intern who'd spilled coffee on him earlier that week, and somehow, despite the absolute impossibility of the situation, it was working. The company's operations hadn't suffered. If anything, employee morale seemed higher than usual. Clients had responded positively to the news when it came up in conversation. The board members who'd been informed had expressed surprise but no objections, particularly after reviewing the impressive work Madison had produced during her brief tenure. As Madison packed up her desk that Friday evening, preparing for the small wedding ceremony planned for the weekend, she reflected on the surreal nature of her transformation. 1 week ago, she'd been a nervous intern afraid of making mistakes. Now she was about to marry one of Chicago's most successful businessmen and had somehow earned the respect of colleagues who'd intimidated her just days earlier. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation of all was visible in Julian himself. The man who'd built walls around his heart was learning to let someone inside those barriers. The CEO who'd measured everything in terms of profit and loss was discovering the value of partnership that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. As they left the office together that evening, Madison realized that sometimes the most profound changes begin with the smallest accidents, like spilling coffee on exactly the right person at exactly the right moment. 3 months after the coffee incident that changed 2 lives forever, Madison and Julian's story had become something of a legend within Sterling and Company and beyond. But this wasn't just another corporate romance or rags-to-riches fairy tale. What happened between them revealed universal truths about success, authenticity, and the courage to recognize opportunity disguised as disaster. The first lesson was perhaps the most powerful. How we respond to our worst moments reveals more about our character than how we handle our best ones. Madison could have reacted to spilling coffee on Julian in dozens of different ways. She could have panicked, made excuses, tried to shift blame to the uneven rug or the poorly placed cup. She could have apologized profusely, while secretly resenting the unfairness of the situation. She could have frozen in terror or fled the office entirely. Instead, she took immediate responsibility and focused on solutions rather than explanations. That response, authentic, action-oriented, and free from self-pity, revealed the core of who she was in a way that no interview process could have uncovered. Character, Julian reflected during a staff meeting 6 months later, isn't what someone shows you when they're trying to impress you. It's what they show you when everything goes wrong and they think nobody important is watching. The second lesson concerned the difference between building walls and building strength. Julian had spent 15 years constructing elaborate defenses around his heart, convincing himself that emotional isolation was the price of professional success. He'd created a fortress that protected him from vulnerability, but also prevented him from experiencing genuine connection. Madison's accidental collision with his carefully ordered world didn't just spill coffee. It revealed the cracks in walls he'd thought were impenetrable. Her authentic response to crisis showed him that strength could come from openness rather than closure, from facing challenges directly rather than insulating yourself from their possibility. True power, Julian learned, isn't about controlling every variable. It's about being confident enough in yourself to handle whatever variables you can't control. Their story also demonstrated the transformative power of seeing people clearly rather than seeing only their position or potential usefulness. Julian's initial impression of Madison was limited to her role as an intern, someone junior, temporary, probably interchangeable with any number of other ambitious young people seeking corporate experience. But the coffee incident forced him to see her as an individual with unique qualities. Integrity under pressure, intelligence that cut through complex problems, and authentic character that couldn't be faked or taught. Madison, meanwhile, could have continued seeing Julian only as an intimidating CEO whose approval she needed for career advancement. Instead, she recognized the lonely human being behind the corporate armor. Someone who'd achieved everything he'd thought he wanted, but had lost sight of what actually mattered. Success means nothing, Madison told a group of business students during a guest lecture the following year, if you achieve it by becoming someone you don't recognize. The goal isn't just to reach the top. It's to reach the top while remaining the kind of person others want to climb there with. Their relationship also illustrated the importance of timing and readiness in recognizing opportunity. Both Julian and Madison were at crucial points in their lives when they collided that Monday morning. He was successful but unfulfilled, wealthy but isolated, powerful but disconnected from his own humanity. She was ambitious but uncertain, talented but unrecognized, ready for challenge but afraid of taking risks. Neither of them was actively looking for romance or life-changing connection. But they were both, without quite realizing it, ready for transformation. Julian had spent enough years in emotional isolation to recognize the value of authentic connection when he encountered it. Madison had developed enough confidence in her own abilities to believe she deserved extraordinary opportunities when they appeared. Luck, Julian observed, is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. But wisdom is recognizing opportunity even when it arrives wearing the disguise of disaster. Perhaps most importantly, their story challenged conventional assumptions about how success should be measured and achieved. Corporate culture often rewards calculated moves, strategic networking, and careful positioning for advancement. Julian and Madison's connection began with none of those elements, just authentic human response to unexpected circumstances. Their marriage wasn't a business merger or strategic alliance. It was two people recognizing something genuine in each other and having the courage to pursue it despite the unconventional timeline and circumstances. The best decisions, Madison learned, aren't always the safest ones. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts even when your spreadsheets say you're being irrational. The ripple effects of their story extended far beyond their personal lives. Sterling and Company's culture began to shift in subtle but meaningful ways. Julian's increasing warmth and openness created space for others to be more authentic in their professional relationships. Madison's success encouraged other junior employees to contribute ideas rather than simply following established protocols. The company's approach to hiring and promotion began emphasizing character assessment alongside technical qualifications. Department heads started paying attention to how candidates handled unexpected challenges rather than just how well they performed in controlled interview settings. Other firms in Chicago's financial district took notice. The story of the intern who spilled coffee on her boss and ended up transforming both their lives became a case study in business schools, though most academic discussions miss the deeper truth about authenticity and human connection. What we really learned, Julian said during their first wedding anniversary interview with a business magazine, is that the most important business skill isn't knowing how to avoid mistakes. It's knowing how to respond to them in ways that create value rather than damage. Madison added, and sometimes the biggest risks turn out to be the safest choices you ever make, because they're based on truth rather than fear. Their story had become proof that extraordinary transformations can begin with ordinary moments, that disaster and opportunity sometimes wear identical faces, and that authentic character reveals itself most clearly when everything seems to be falling apart. Most importantly, it showed that success without connection is just elaborate loneliness, but success shared with the right person becomes something that enriches everyone around it. 5 years have passed since Madison Harper walked into that elevator clutching a manila folder and her dreams, completely unaware that she was about to spill her way into a love story that would redefine everything she thought she knew about success, courage, and taking chances. Today, Madison Crane serves as Chief Operating Officer of Sterling and Company, a position she earned through the same combination of brilliant insight and authentic character that caught Julian's attention that first chaotic morning. The company has doubled in size under their joint leadership, but more importantly, it's become known throughout Chicago's financial district as a place where talent is recognized regardless of background and where character matters as much as competence. Julian, meanwhile, has discovered that success shared is exponentially more fulfilling than success achieved in isolation. The man once known as the Ice King, now mentors young professionals, speaks at business schools about the importance of authentic leadership, and has never again made a major decision without considering how it aligns with his values rather than just his profit margins. Their marriage has become a partnership that extends far beyond their personal lives. Together, they've created scholarship programs for first-generation college students, funded small business initiatives in underserved communities, and established mentorship networks that connect experienced professionals with ambitious newcomers who might otherwise never get the chance to prove their worth. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about Madison and Julian's story isn't what they achieved together. It's what their journey reveals about the extraordinary potential hiding within ordinary moments. Think about it. How many times have you apologized for a mistake and wondered if that apology revealed weakness? How many opportunities have you missed because they didn't arrive in the package you expected? How many times have you chosen the safe path over the authentic one because you were afraid of what others might think? Madison's story proves that our biggest disasters can become our greatest victories, but only if we respond with integrity instead of panic, with action instead of excuses, with courage instead of retreat. Her coffee spill didn't create her character. It revealed character that was already there. Her promotion wasn't luck. It was the natural result of authentic behavior under pressure. Her marriage to Julian wasn't a fairy tale. It was two people recognizing genuine connection and having the courage to pursue it despite every rational reason to proceed more cautiously. The truth is, we all have coffee spill moments. Situations where everything goes wrong, where we're embarrassed and vulnerable, where our first instinct is to hide or make excuses or blame circumstances beyond our control. But what if, instead of seeing these moments as disasters to survive, we recognize them as opportunities to reveal who we really are? What if your next mistake, the one you're dreading, the one that keeps you up at night worrying, what if that mistake is actually the doorway to everything you've been working toward? Julian's transformation reminds us that success without connection is just elaborate loneliness. You can accumulate wealth, power, recognition, and still feel empty if you're not sharing the journey with people who matter. Real success isn't about building walls to protect yourself from vulnerability. It's about being confident enough in who you are to let the right people see behind those walls. Madison's journey shows us that belonging isn't about having the right connections or the perfect background. It's about bringing authentic value wherever you go and having the courage to believe you deserve the opportunities that come your way. Their love story proves that the best relationships aren't built on careful strategy or perfect timing. They're built on mutual recognition of character, shared values, and the willingness to take extraordinary risks for genuine connection. If Madison's story inspired you to take a bold chance in your own life, smash that like button right now. Her transformation from nervous intern to confident leader shows what's possible when you stop apologizing for who you are and start contributing who you are. Subscribe and ring that notification bell for more incredible billionaire stories that prove your background doesn't determine your future. Your character does. These aren't just entertaining tales. They're roadmaps for anyone ready to stop playing small and start recognizing the opportunities hiding inside their challenges. Comment and tell me, what's your coffee spill moment? What accident or mistake in your life led to something amazing? Share your story because someone watching needs to hear that their disaster might be their breakthrough in disguise. Share this video with someone who needs to believe in second chances, who's been playing it safe for too long, or who needs to remember that extraordinary opportunities sometimes come wearing ordinary clothes. Most importantly, remember this: your next big break might be just one mistake away. The person who changes your life forever might be someone you accidentally inconvenience. The opportunity that transforms everything might arrive disguised as the disaster you're trying to avoid. Madison Harper walked into Sterling & Company as a nervous intern afraid of making mistakes. She walked out as Madison Crane, a confident leader who understood that mistakes don't define you. How you respond to them does. Your story is still being written. Your coffee spill moment is still coming. The question isn't whether you'll face challenges and setbacks. You will. The question is whether you'll respond with the kind of authentic courage that turns disasters into destiny. What will you choose when your moment arrives? Before you go, here's what I want you to remember. Madison Harper's life changed forever because she chose courage over comfort when everything went wrong. That same choice is available to you right now. Your breakthrough might be hiding inside your next setback. Your destiny might be disguised as your disaster. The question is, will you be ready to recognize it? If this story opened your eyes to new possibilities, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what your biggest takeaway was. Subscribe to the Billionaire CEO Stories channel and ring the notification bell because we're just getting started. Share this video with someone who needs to believe their story isn't over. It's just beginning. Until next time, keep spilling coffee and changing lives.